The air in the Hawthorne Atrium Hotel ballroom felt thin, recycled through vents that cost more than my annual salary. I stood near a marble pillar, checking my phone for the third time in 5 minutes, pretending to be busy so I looked important enough to belong here. My father demanded a perfect family portrait for the Doveridge Civic Gala, so I wore the dress, fixed my smile, and prayed that for once, 33 years of trying would finally be enough. The air in the Hawthorne Atrium Hotel ballroom felt thin, recycled through vents that cost more than my annual salary. I stood near a marble pillar, checking my phone for the third time in 5 minutes, pretending to be busy so I looked important enough to belong here. My father demanded a perfect family portrait for the Doveridge Civic Gala, so I wore the dress, fixed my smile, and prayed that for once, 33 years of trying would finally be enough. The chandelier above us was a monstrosity of crystal and gold, casting a fractured, shimmering light over 300 guests who all smelled like expensive perfume and old money. This was Port Alder society at its peak, a collection of developers, city council members, and hospital board directors, all pretending that drinking $20 glasses of wine constituted civic duty. I smoothed the fabric of my navy gown. It was modest, tailored, and entirely forgettable, just like my father preferred. Graham Bailey, the CEO of Bailey Development Group and the unofficial king of North Ridge, did not like distractions. He liked assets. He liked things that could be placed on a ledger and counted. I had spent my entire life trying to figure out which column I belonged in, and tonight, the answer felt uncomfortably clear. I was in the liability column. Check the phone again. 0 notifications. The screen reflected my own face back at me, pale, tight-jawed, eyes shifting left and right as if expecting a blow. I tucked the phone away and forced my shoulders down. I had practiced this in the mirror before I left my apartment. Shoulders down, chin up, soft smile. Do not speak unless spoken to. Across the room, my father was holding court. He stood in the center of a circle of men in tuxedos, his laugh booming over the low hum of the string quartet. He looked vigorous for 60, with silver hair that seemed to catch the light and a tan that spoke of weekends on boats I was rarely invited to board. Beside him stood Evan, my older brother. Evan was the heir apparent, the vice president of operations, the one who looked exactly like Graham Bailey, just 30 years younger and slightly less jagged. I watched them interact. It was a masterclass in nonverbal communication. Graham would make a point, gesturing with his Scotch glass, and Evan would nod at the exact right millisecond, laughing at the punchline before it even landed. They were a closed loop of validation. I began to walk toward them, my heels clicking softly on the polished floor. I needed to check in. I needed to show my face so my father could mark my attendance on his mental clipboard. As I approached, the circle of men shifted, but they did not open up to include me. They remained a wall of black wool and starch. I stopped just outside the perimeter, close enough to be seen but far enough away to be ignored. My father was speaking to Arthur Pence, a commercial zoning commissioner, and Evan. He is handling the serious work now, Graham said, clapping a heavy hand on my brother's shoulder. The waterfront project? That was all him. He navigated the environmental impact study like a surgeon. Evan beamed, looking down at his shoes with practiced humility. We just want what is best for Port Alder. Dad? Graham squeezed his shoulder. That is why you are good at this, son. You see the big picture. I stood there, feeling the familiar burn of invisibility. I worked in compliance and risk management at Larkwell Health Cooperative, one of the largest healthcare providers in the state. My job was not glamorous. It did not involve ribbon cuttings or zoning variances. It involved staring at spreadsheets until my eyes watered, tracing the flow of federal dollars through layers of bureaucracy to ensure that no one was breaking the law. It was serious work. In fact, given the complexity of the regulations I navigated daily, it was arguably more serious than convincing a zoning board to let you build a condo 5 feet closer to a wetland. Arthur Pence noticed me first. He smiled, his teeth capped and white. And Julia, good to see you. How is the little job going? My father turned, His eyes slid over me, checking my hair, my dress, my posture. He gave a microscopic nod of approval. "Julia is doing fine," Graham said, answering for me. "She is still at the hospital co-op, doing her cute office stuff, filing papers, keeping the doctors in line." He winked at the group. "Someone has to keep the paperwork organized, right?" The men chuckled. "Cute office stuff." I felt a sharp, hot stone lodge in my throat. I managed a smile that felt like it was made of glass. "Actually," I said, my voice sounding thin in the cavernous room, "I was just promoted to senior risk analyst. We are currently auditing the vendor procurement protocols for the entire Western region. It is—" Graham cut me off with a wave of his hand, as if swatting away a fly. "Details. Julia, do not bore the gentleman with details. Everyone needs a hobby." He turned his back to me, resuming his conversation with Arthur about interest rates. I stood there for 3 seconds, staring at the back of his head. Hobby. My career, the one I had built without his help, without his money, and without his name on the door, was a hobby. I took a slow breath, counted to 4, and turned away before the moisture in my eyes could catch the light. Cute office stuff. If only he knew. I found my assigned seat at table 4. It was close to the front, but not at the head table. The head table was for Graham, Evan, the mayor, and the keynote speakers. Table 4 was for secondary players. I sat next to a man I vaguely recognized. Mr. Henderson, a local contractor who owned a fleet of cement trucks. The dinner service began with a flurry of waiters dropping plates of endive salad. Mr. Henderson was already on his 3rd glass of wine, his face flushed. "So, Julia," he said, leaning in too close, "your dad tells me business is booming. Must be nice to be a Bailey in this town. Doors just open. Do they not?" "Some doors," I said, unfolding my napkin. Henderson laughed. "All doors. You know, it is funny. I was just talking to your brother about how smooth things usually run, but lately, it is getting weird out there." I paused, my fork hovering over the salad. "Weird how?" Henderson lowered his voice, looking around conspiratorially. "You did not hear this from me, but there is this letter going around, a mysterious audit letter. It rattled a few of the guys in HVAC and electrical last month." My heart stopped. It literally skipped a beat and then hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Henderson continued, oblivious to my paralysis. Some anonymous person flagged a bunch of billing patterns, said the invoices for the new surgical wing at Larkwell looked inflated. Can you believe the nerve? They claimed the vendor names did not match the state registry. I set my fork down. My hand was trembling, so I hid it in my lap. I knew the letter. I knew it because I had written it. 3 weeks ago, late at night, I had been reconciling the quarterly expenses for the hospital's expansion project. I noticed a recurring payment to a company called North Pine Supply. It sounded legitimate, but the tax identification number was 1 digit off from a defunct landscaping business. When I pulled the digital invoices, they were generic. No itemized lists, no shipping manifests, just round numbers, $10,000, $15,000. I had dug deeper. I found 4 other vendors with similar phantom profiles. All of them were subcontractors for the primary construction firm handling the expansion. The primary construction firm was a subsidiary of Bailey Development Group. I could not prove my father knew. I told myself he was too high up to check subcontractor invoices. It had to be a mistake, or a rogue project manager, but I could not sign off on it. My signature meant I certified the compliance. If I signed, I was complicit. If I refused, I had to explain why. So I wrote the memo. I sent it anonymously to the Internal Audit Committee, flagging the irregularities without naming my family. I thought I was protecting the hospital. I thought I was protecting myself. Who would do something like that? Henderson asked, stabbing a piece of lettuce. Probably some jealous bureaucrat trying to slow down progress. I heard the contractors are scrambling to redo their paperwork. It is a headache. I took a sip of water, the ice clinking against the glass. It sounded like a gunshot in my ear. Just doing their job. I suppose, I whispered. Henderson snorted. Job? That is not a job, that is sabotage. The main course arrived, filet mignon with a red wine reduction, but I could not eat. The smell of the meat made my stomach turn. I sat there, rigid, listening to the clatter of silverware and the drone of conversation, feeling like a spy in my own life. They were talking about the audit as if it were a nuisance, a fly in the ointment. They did not see the theft. They only saw the inconvenience of being caught. At 8 o'clock, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the podium at the front of the room. The conversation died down, replaced by polite applause. My father walked onto the stage. He looked magnificent. I hated that I thought that. But it was true. Graham Bailey commanded a room simply by existing. He adjusted the microphone, smiled that shark-like smile, and waited for absolute silence. "Thank you, everyone," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "It is an honor to be here tonight to support the Doveridge Civic Fund. We all know that a strong community is built on strong foundations." He paused for effect. "My family has been building in Port Alder for 40 years. We do not just pour concrete, we pour our hearts into this city." Applause. I clapped mechanically, my hands numb. "I look around this room and I see partners." He continued, "I see friends, and I see the future. I am so proud of the work we have done this year, especially the new community center in the East Ward." I stiffened. The East Ward Community Center, that project had been a disaster of paperwork. I knew about it because Larkwell Health had sponsored the on-site clinic. The grant money, $2 million from the state, had been delayed 3 times because the Bailey Group failed to submit the proper environmental clearances. The project was 6 months behind schedule. My father beamed. "We got that project done ahead of schedule and under budget, because that is the Bailey way." He was lying. He was lying to 300 people, and they were eating it up. He raised his glass. "I want to toast my family, my late wife, Caroline, who taught us about grace, my son, Evan, who is taking the company to new heights." He pointed to Evan, who stood up and waved. Thunderous applause. "And," Graham said, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me, "my daughter, Julia." The spotlight swung. It blinded me. I froze, a deer caught in the high beams of his ego. "Julia, stand up," he commanded. I stood, my legs shaking. "Julia has always had a big imagination," Graham said, his tone shifting into that jovial, teasing register that fathers use to belittle their children in public. "She always had big dreams, wanted to save the world. Did you not, sweetheart?" A ripple of laughter went through the room, but he shrugged, holding his glass high. "We Baileys know that dreams do not build skyscrapers. Grit does. And Julia, well, she is still learning that follow-through is the hard part." The laughter grew louder. He was framing me as a flighty, unserious child. I do not know what possessed me. Maybe it was the cute office stuff comment. Maybe it was Henderson calling my audit sabotage. Maybe it was just 33 years of being the punchline. I spoke. I did not shout. I did not scream. I just said, loud enough for the table to hear, loud enough to drift toward the stage in the sudden lull of the laughter. "The East Ward Center is not finished. Dad." The room went dead silent. The silence was not peaceful. It was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the ballroom. Graham stared at me from the stage. The smile did not leave his face, but it changed. The warmth evaporated, leaving only the hard, cold geometry of his ambition. "Excuse me?" he said into the microphone. I could feel Evan staring at me from the head table, his eyes wide with warning. "Sit down. Julia, sit down." I gripped the edge of the table. "The grant requires the clinic to be operational by June," I said, my voice trembling but audible. "It is still a shell. We cannot take credit for it yet. It was a correction, a factual, compliance-based correction. It was the truth." My father laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. He leaned into the microphone. "This is what I mean, folks," he said. He shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust, always finding the problem, never offering the solution. He paused. The room waited. You know, Julia, he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming intimate and deadly. I invited you tonight because I wanted you to see what success looks like, but if you are going to stand there and nitpick the people actually doing the work, maybe you should have stayed home. He took a sip of his wine, then lowered the glass. Honestly, he said, and the word hung in the air like a blade. Sometimes you are worthless. The word hit me physically. It struck me in the chest, knocking the breath out of my lungs. Worthless. He had said it. He had said it into a microphone, in front of the mayor, in front of the bank presidents, in front of the people who controlled my city. The silence that followed was horrifying. I focused on the weave of the fabric, over, under, over, under. If I looked up, I would cry. And if I cried, he won. From the corner of my eye, I saw a movement across the room, at a table near the back. A woman was watching me. She was older, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She wore a black suit jacket over a silk blouse, sharper than the evening gowns around her. It was Senator Eleanor Wexford. Everyone knew Senator Wexford. She was the state's conscience, or its nuisance, depending on who you asked. She had made a career out of dragging corruption into the sunlight. She was not looking at my father. She was not clapping. She was looking directly at me. Her expression was unreadable. It was not pity. I knew pity. I saw it in the eyes of the other wives and daughters. This was different. Her eyes were narrowed, focused. She looked like a jeweler inspecting a stone to see if it would crack under pressure. She looked assessing. I could not breathe. The air in the ballroom was suddenly too thick, too heavy with the scent of roast beef and hypocrisy. I pushed my chair back. It scraped against the floor. A harsh sound. But no one looked. I was already forgotten. I walked. I did not run. I kept my head down, navigating the maze of tables, aiming for the double doors near the service entrance. I passed Evan, but he did not look up from his phone. He was probably already texting his PR team to spin the moment. Quirky sister, family banter, nothing to see here. I pushed through the heavy doors and spilled out into the hallway. The silence of the corridor was a shock. The carpet here was uglier, a utilitarian brown, and the lighting was fluorescent. I walked past the kitchen entrance. Hearing the clatter of dishes and the shouting of chefs, I kept walking until I reached a quiet alcove near the elevators. I leaned against the wall, my knees giving way. I slid down until I was crouching, my expensive dress pooling on the dirty carpet. Worthless. The word echoed in my skull. It bounced off the walls of my mind, growing louder with every repetition. I closed my eyes and started the count. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. My hands were shaking so hard I had to clasp them together. 1, 2, 3, 4. I opened my eyes and focused on a framed photograph on the opposite wall. It was a generic black and white shot of the Port Alder skyline at dusk. I traced the outline of the buildings with my eyes. There was the bank tower. There was the bridge. There was the Bailey Development Group headquarters, standing taller than the rest, a monument to the man who had just dismantled me for sport. Get up, Julia, I whispered to myself. Get up. You are a senior risk analyst. You handle federal audits. You do not cry on hotel hallway floors. I forced myself to stand. I smoothed my dress. I wiped the corner of my eye with my thumb, checking for mascara smudges. I heard the click of heels approaching. I stiffened, turning toward the sound. If it was Evan coming to scold me, I was going to scream. If it was my father, it was neither. A woman stood at the end of the hallway. She was younger than me, perhaps late 20s, with a sleek bob cut and a tablet tucked under her arm. She wore a charcoal pantsuit that looked tailored to within an inch of its life. She didn't look like a gala guest. She looked like a soldier in civilian clothing. She walked toward me with a calm, predatory grace. She stopped 3 feet away, respecting my personal space but blocking my exit. "Ms. Bailey?" she asked. Her voice was cool, professional. I swallowed, my throat dry. "Yes?" She offered a small, practiced smile. It did not reach her eyes. My name is Tessa Marr. I am the Chief of Staff for Senator Wexford. I stared at her. The senator? Tessa Marr nodded. She gestured vaguely back toward the ballroom. Rough night in there. I felt a flash of defensive heat. I am fine. I was just… The senator would like a word. Tessa interrupted, her tone making it clear this was not a request. I blinked. With me? Why? Tessa did not answer the question. She stepped aside, gesturing toward a service door that led to the private meeting lounges. Somewhere private, she said. I looked at the door, then back at Tessa. My mind was racing. Why would Senator Eleanor Wexford want to talk to me? I was nobody. I was the worthless daughter who did cute office stuff. Unless she had seen the audit letter, the thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. Did she know? Had my anonymous memo leaked all the way to the state senate? If she knew, I was in trouble. If she knew, I was exposed. But if I stayed here, in this hallway, I had to go back in there. I had to go back to Graham and Evan and the suffocating weight of their disappointment. I looked at Tessa Marr's face. She looked patient, but efficient. She was waiting for me to decide if I wanted to be a victim or something else. I took a breath. The air in the hallway still smelled like prime rib and floor wax, but suddenly, it felt different. It felt like the air before a thunderstorm. I am coming, I said. I followed her down the corridor, the sound of our footsteps syncing up. I felt a strange, cold sensation in my stomach. It felt like fear, but beneath the fear, there was something else, a tiny, dangerous spark of curiosity. Being humiliated by my father was a familiar hell. Being summoned by a senator immediately afterward felt like a new one. I just couldn't tell yet if she was offering me a life raft, or if she was the one who was going to hold my head under the water. The private lounge was a space designed for silence. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind Tessa Marr, sealing off the hum of the gala and the string quartet. The room was dimly lit, smelling of old leather and unlit cigars, a stark contrast to the sterile brightness of the ballroom hallway. Senator Eleanor Wexford sat in a high-backed wing chair near a cold fireplace. She held a glass of sparkling water, the bubbles rising in a slow, hypnotic chain. She did not look like a woman who had just witnessed a public family execution. She looked like a judge waiting for the court to come to order. Sit, Wexford said. It was not an order, but it was not a suggestion either. I sat on the edge of the sofa opposite her. The leather creaked, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. I kept my hands folded in my lap, resisting the urge to check my phone or fix my hair. I waited for her to bring it up. I waited for her to say, "That was brutal," or "Your father is a difficult man," or even just, "Are you all right?" She did none of those things. Senator Wexford took a sip of her water, set the glass down on a coaster, and looked me dead in the eye. "Tell me about the vendor approval process at Larkwell Health Cooperative." I blinked. The question was so disconnected from the emotional wreckage of the last 10 minutes that my brain stalled. "Excuse me?" I asked. Wexford leaned forward slightly. "Larkwell Health. You work in compliance. Specifically, you audit third-party contracts for the Western region expansion. I want to know how a vendor gets approved. Does it go through a blind committee? Or does it go through a single signatory?" I stared at her. My heart was still pounding from my father calling me worthless, and she was asking me about bureaucratic workflow. "Senator," I said, my voice steadying itself out of pure professional habit, "I do not see how that is relevant to…" "Humor me. Julia." She used my first name. It sounded strange coming from her. Clinical. Like a doctor naming a patient. I took a breath. It is a 3-step process. The department head submits a request for proposal. Procurement vets the bids for financial viability. Then, if the contract is over $50,000, it goes to risk and compliance for a conflict of interest check. "And you are the check," she said. "I am one of them." "Yes. And have you ever noticed," she continued, her voice dropping to a conversational murmur, "that money seems to move in circles?" I stiffened. "What do you mean?" "I mean that a hospital pays a vendor for drywall that never arrives. That vendor pays a consulting firm for advice that is never given, and that consulting firm makes a donation to a charitable foundation that builds nothing. The money leaves the hospital, takes a walk around the block, and ends up in a pocket 5 miles away. My stomach turned over. She was describing the exact pattern I had seen in the invoices, the pattern I had flagged in the memo. I do not know what you're talking about. I lied. It was a reflex. You do not talk about work outside of work, especially not with state senators who eat developers for lunch. Wexford sighed. She reached into her leather portfolio resting on the floor and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She slid it across the low coffee table toward me. It was a photocopy. The header was redacted with thick black marker. The date was 3 weeks ago. I looked at the text. Subject: Irregular billing cadence. Vendor code 8842. Summary: Examination of accounts payable reveals a statistically improbable variance in billing cycles for North Pine Supply. Invoices are submitted in batches of 3, always totaling just under the $15,000 threshold for secondary review. I stopped reading. The room seemed to tilt. Statistically improbable variance. That was my phrase. I had agonized over that wording. I had deleted fraud and replaced it with variance to be professional. I had written this memo on my secure work laptop, late at night, in an empty office. I had submitted it through the anonymous whistleblower portal that Larkwell promised was encrypted and third-party managed. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. Wexford did not answer. She tapped the paper with a manicured fingernail. "You wrote this, didn't you?" I looked up at her. I felt exposed. Skinned. "Who gave this to you? This is internal. This is confidential. Nothing in this town is confidential." "Julia," Wexford said, her voice hard, "especially not when it touches the Bailey ecosystem." She sat back, observing my panic with that same assessing gaze she had used in the ballroom. "You think you are anonymous," she said. "You think you threw a pebble into a pond and walked away. But you didn't throw a pebble. You cracked a window. And now people are looking inside." I felt a surge of nausea. If she had this, who else had it? Did my boss know? Did Evan know? I stood up. "I cannot talk to you. I signed an NDA when I took the job. I could be fired for even looking at that piece of paper." "Sit down," Wexford said. I remained standing. "I am leaving." "You are not leaving," Wexford said. And this time, there was steel in her tone, because if you walk out that door, you are walking back into a room full of people who think you are a joke, and one of them, your father, knows exactly what you are worth, but he is wrong about why. I froze. "He thinks you are worthless because you don't make him money." Wexford said, "But I think he is wrong. I think you are incredibly useful." The word hung in the air. Useful. I sat back down slowly. "Why?" I asked. "Why am I useful?" Wexford gestured to Tessa Marr, who had been standing silently by the door like a statue. Tessa stepped forward. Placing a tablet on the table, the screen displayed a complex diagram, a spiderweb of lines connecting varying entities. "I chair the Northridge Public Integrity Task Group," Wexford said. "It is a boring name for a very interesting project. We have been tracking municipal corruption for 18 months. We are looking at a specific ecosystem of bid rigging." She pointed to a box on the screen labeled Bailey Development Group. "Your father builds the buildings," she said. "That is the visible part. But to build them, he needs permits. He needs zoning variances. He needs hospital contracts to anchor his developments. And to get those, money has to change hands. But Graham Bailey is too smart to hand a bag of cash to a councilman." She pointed to a cluster of smaller boxes. North Pine Supply, J. Bailey Consulting, the Alderbridge Foundation. "He uses buffers," she explained. "He uses vendors that don't exist. He uses consultants who don't consult. And he uses charities that function as slush funds." I stared at the screen. The Alderbridge Foundation. My father was the chairman. Evan was on the board. We went to their gala every December. They gave scholarships to high school students. "That is a charity," I said defensively. "They built the library annex. They paid for the library annex," Wexford corrected. "But look at who they hired to build it. Look at who supplied the concrete. Look at the consulting fees paid to board members. She swiped the screen. A list of transactions appeared. We have the map. Julia, we know the money is moving, but we are missing the mechanism. We need to know how they are bypassing the compliance software. We need to know who is signing off on the variance reports. She looked at me. We need a risk analyst. I shook my head, backing away from the table. No, absolutely not. You are asking me to spy on my father. I am asking you to do your job, Wexford said. You flagged North Pine Supply. You saw the pattern. You know something is wrong. I saw a billing error, I said, my voice rising. That is all. It could be incompetence. It doesn't have to be a conspiracy. Wexford looked at me with a pity that was far worse than my father's contempt. It was the pity of a woman watching a child try to catch a knife. Julia, she said softly, you are 33 years old. You are intelligent. You are observant. Do you really believe that Graham Bailey, a man who counts the ice cubes in his scotch, allows billing errors to happen in his companies? The question landed like a weight. I thought of my father's meticulous nature. I thought of how he inspected the mileage logs on the company cars. I thought of the way he looked at Evan earlier tonight, the shared language of control. He doesn't make mistakes, I whispered. No, Wexford said, he doesn't. Which means the error you found wasn't an error, it was a feature. And by flagging it, you didn't just annoy a contractor. You tripped a wire. She leaned in. That is why you are useful, Julia. And that is why you have been kept small. Why do you think he calls your job cute office stuff? Why do you think he humiliates you in public? I stared at her. Because he is a bully. Because if he convinces you that you are worthless, Wexford said, you will never look closely enough to realize that you are the most dangerous person in his world. You are the one person with the access and the skill to dismantle the ledger. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I cannot help you. I said, I am just his daughter. Wexford held my gaze for a long moment, then she nodded to Tessa. Tessa stepped forward and held out a small, cream-colored business card. This is not my card, Tessa said. Her voice was lower than Wexford's, less commanding but more urgent. This is Maren Klein. She is an attorney in Ridgeway Harbor. She specializes in white-collar whistleblowers and identity fraud. I looked at the card. It was simple, just a name and a number. Why do I need an attorney? I asked. I haven't done anything wrong. Tessa pressed the card into my hand. Her fingers were warm. If you talk to us, you do it protected, Tessa said. We can offer you immunity. We can seal your testimony. And if I don't? Tessa looked at Wexford, then back at me. If you don't, you should still protect yourself, she said, because if your father knows you wrote that memo, and he will find out, if he doesn't know already, he is not going to ground you. Julia, he is going to neutralize you. The word neutralize sounded violent. You mean fire me? I asked. I mean he will make sure you lose credibility before you can speak. Tessa said, he will make sure that if you ever try to tell the truth, you look like a disgruntled, unstable daughter who is lashing out because daddy didn't love her enough. I flinched. It was too close to the truth. It was exactly what he had done on stage 10 minutes ago. She always had big dreams but no follow-through. He had already planted the seed. I took the card. I slid it into the hidden pocket of my gown, right next to my phone. I have to go. I said, I have to go back, if I'm gone too long. Go, Wexford said. She picked up her water glass again, dismissing me as abruptly as she had summoned me. But Julia? I paused at the door. Watch your pockets, she said, and watch your back. I walked back into the ballroom, and the noise hit me like a physical wave. The laughter, the clinking of silverware, the jazz band playing a sanitized version of a pop song, it all felt aggressive. My hands were shaking. I clenched them into fists at my sides. I navigated the room, feeling like an alien species. 10 minutes ago, I was a humiliated daughter. Now, I was a potential witness in a state investigation. I felt like the card in my pocket was emitting radiation, burning through the silk of my dress. I scanned the room for my table. Mr. Henderson was gone. likely at the bar. Then I saw Evan. He was standing near the entrance to the terrace, holding a tumbler of whiskey. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was just standing there, watching the room. No, he wasn't watching the room. He was watching the hallway door. He was watching me. Our eyes locked across 50 feet of banquet tables. Usually, Evan gave me a wave or a nod. Tonight, he did neither. His face was perfectly still. It was the face of the vice president of operations calculating a liability. His eyes tracked me as I moved, sharp and unblinking. It wasn't the look of a brother concerned about his sister's feelings. It was the look of a man wondering what I had just said. And to whom? I looked away, my pulse spiking. He knows. I tried to blend in near the dessert table, a sprawling display of petite fours and chocolate-dipped strawberries. I picked up a small plate, just to have something to hold. My fingers felt numb. "Did you enjoy your little chat?" The voice came from directly behind my left ear. Soft, velvety, terrifying. I spun around, nearly dropping the plate. Graham Bailey stood there. He was smiling. It was his public smile. Warm, benevolent. The smile of the philanthropist of the year. But his eyes were dead. "Dad." I breathed. "You startled me." He took a step closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive scotch and peppermint. He placed a hand on my elbow. His grip was firm, not painful, but inescapable. "I saw you slip away," he said, "and I saw Tessa Marr follow you." He squeezed my elbow gently. "Senator Wexford is a very ambitious woman. Julia, she likes to stir up trouble where there is none. I hope she didn't bore you with her conspiracy theories." My mouth went dry. Deny everything. She just wanted to ask about the hospital expansion. I said, my voice sounded remarkably calm. A miracle of adrenaline. She wanted to know if the compliance reports were public record. I told her to check the website. Graham studied my face. He was looking for the tell. He was looking for the flinch. I held my breath. "Good," he said finally. His grip on my elbow loosened, then converted into a pat. "That is my smart girl. You know, Julia, people like Wexford, they don't understand how the real world works. They think everything is a plot. They don't understand that business is about relationships." He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "You stay away from her. Jules, she will only use you to get to me. And we are family. We protect each other, right?" The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. We protect each other. He had just called me worthless in front of the entire city. "Right, Dad," I said. He smiled. Satisfied. "Good. Now, eat a strawberry. You look pale." He walked away, dissolving back into the crowd of admirers. I stood by the dessert table, staring at the chocolate strawberry on my plate. I felt sick. I felt watched. I realized then that the audit letter wasn't just a mistake. It was the first loose thread in a sweater my father was wearing, and he was terrified I was going to pull it. I left the gala 5 minutes later. I didn't say goodbye. My apartment was usually my sanctuary. It was a one-bedroom on the north side of the city, not the trendy side, but a safe side. I paid for it myself. I bought the furniture myself. It was the one place in Port Alder where I didn't feel like a tenant in my father's life. But tonight, as I unlocked the door, the air inside felt stale. I dropped my keys on the console table and kicked off my heels. My feet throbbed. I wanted to scrub the makeup off my face and sleep for a week. I walked to the kitchen island where I had dumped my mail earlier in the day and hadn't looked at it. It was mostly junk, grocery circulars, credit card offers, and a stack of glossy campaign mailers. Re-elect Mayor Taggart. Vote yes on Proposition 4. I pushed them aside, looking for my electric bill. At the bottom of the pile was a plain white envelope. No return address, just my name, Julia Bailey, typed on a label. I frowned. It looked like a bill, but it was too thin. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy of a wire transfer confirmation. Date, October 14th, 2024. Originating bank, First National of North Ridge account holder, Larkwell Health Cooperative. Beneficiary, J. Bailey. Consulting, LLC. Amount, $8,500. Memo, Advisory Services. Q. 3 Procurement Review. I stared at the paper. The silence in my apartment went from peaceful to predatory. J. Bailey Consulting. I didn't own a consulting company. I had never registered an LLC. I had never received $8,500 from Larkwell Health outside of my salary. I read the document again. The beneficiary address was listed as a P.O. box in a neighborhood I hadn't lived in since I was 22. My hands started to shake. Violent tremors that rattled the paper. Someone had opened a company in my name. Someone was funneling money from my employer to this fake company, and they had sent me the receipt. Who sent this? Was it Wexford? Was it a warning? We know what you did. Or was it someone else? I dropped the paper on the counter as if it were burning. I backed away until my back hit the refrigerator. Money moving in circles. Wexford had said, if there was a J, Bailey Consulting, and it was receiving kickbacks, then on paper. I wasn't just the compliance officer, I was the thief. I slid down the front of the refrigerator until I was sitting on the cool tile of the kitchen floor. The panic set in then. It wasn't the slow anxiety of the gala. It was a fast, spiraling terror. I closed my eyes and the memories started flashing. Not big moments, but small ones. The moments I had ignored. Christmas Eve, 3 years ago. The study in the big house. I was drinking eggnog. Graham called me in. Hey, Jules, I need a quick signature on this. Just some liability shielding for the trust. You know how the lawyers get. I had signed it. I didn't read it. It was Christmas. He was my dad. Thanksgiving. Last year. Evan handing me a stack of papers while I was cooking. Just transfer documents for the old car. Julia, sign here. And here, I was watching the turkey. I signed. I was good with details. That's what they always said. Julia handles the paperwork. Julia reads the fine print. But I hadn't read the fine print. I had trusted them. I had trusted the people who shared my DNA. And they had weaponized my signature. They had built a shell company, slapped my name on it, and used it to siphon money out of the very hospital I was sworn to protect. If this came out, if Wexford found this, I wouldn't be a witness. I would be a defendant. I scrambled up and ran to my bedroom. I grabbed my laptop. I needed to check the Secretary of State website. I needed to see if the LLC was real, but I stopped. My hand hovered over the lid. If I searched for it on my personal Wi-Fi, was that traceable? If I logged in, would it alert someone? Paranoia. I told myself, you are being paranoid. But then I remembered Graham's voice. Did you enjoy your little chat? I put the laptop down. I didn't open it. I spent the night pacing. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the word worthless, written in neon lights. And then I saw that bank transfer. They were connected. Of course they were connected. He called me worthless to keep me insecure. He kept me small so I wouldn't ask questions. And meanwhile, he was using my identity as a human shield for his financial games. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m, 4 a.m. I went to the window and watched the city sleeping. The lights of the bridge twinkled in the distance. Somewhere out there, in a glass tower. My father was probably sleeping soundly. He didn't pace. He didn't worry. He had people for that. He had me. By 5 a.m, the sky was turning a bruised purple. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. The routine was grounding. Grind the beans. Pour the water. Wait. I stood there, holding the warm mug, looking at the photocopy on the counter. I could burn it. I could shred it and pretend I never saw it. I could go to work on Monday and keep my head down. I could continue to be the dutiful daughter who does cute office stuff, but I knew the truth now. The ignorance was gone. If I stayed silent, I was going to prison. It was a matter of time, when the house of cards fell, and it would fall. Because Wexford was circling, my father would not catch me. He would point to the signatures. He would point to the LLC. He would say, Julia always had big dreams. She must have gotten greedy. He would sacrifice me to save Evan. He would sacrifice me to save the company. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. I reached into the pocket of the dress I had thrown over the chair. I pulled out the cream-colored card. Marin Klein, attorney at law. I wasn't brave. My hands were still shaking. I was terrified of what would happen if I made the call. But I was more terrified of what would happen if I didn't. I am not a hero. I whispered to the empty room. I wasn't doing this for justice. I wasn't doing this to save the city. I was doing this because I was drowning, and my family was the one holding the hose. I placed the card next to the bank transfer. I would meet Marin Klein. I would find out how deep the rot went, and I would find a way to survive it. I finished my coffee as the sun broke over the skyline. Illuminating the city that was trying to eat me alive, I was going to fight back, not with a scream, but with the one thing my father underestimated, my attention to detail. Ridgeway Harbor was the part of Port Alder that the postcards ignored. It was a grid of converted warehouses, fishing docks, and coffee shops that smelled of roasted beans and salt water. It was trendy now, but it still held the grit of its industrial past. I parked my sedan 3 blocks away from the Black Kettle, checking my rearview mirror twice before killing the engine. I felt ridiculous. I felt like a character in a bad spy novel, but then I touched the pocket of my trench coat, feeling the folded photocopy of the bank transfer, and the feeling of ridiculousness vanished, replaced by the cold, hard weight of necessity. Marin Klein was already there. She sat at a corner table, far from the window. She did not look like the high-powered attorneys my father kept on retainer. Those men wore 3-piece suits and smiled like sharks. Marin wore a thick cable-knit sweater and reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. She looked like a librarian who could dismantle a corporation with a single reference number. I sat down. She didn't offer a handshake. She just pushed a steaming mug of tea toward me. "You look like you haven't slept," Marin said. Her voice was low, gravelly, and entirely without judgment. "I didn't sleep," I admitted, wrapping my hands around the mug for warmth. "I found something in my mail." I slid the envelope across the scratched wooden table. Marin opened it. She put on her glasses and studied the document for a long time. She didn't gasp. She didn't frown. She just read it, her eyes tracking every line of the wire transfer. J. Bailey Consulting. She read softly. "Is this you?" "No. Do you have any consulting agreements with Larkwell Health?" "No." Marin nodded and placed the paper down, smoothing the crease with her thumb. "This is the unglamorous part of white-collar crime. Julia," she said, "people expect wiretaps and secret meetings in parking garages. But mostly, it is just paperwork. It is boring, tedious, duplicated paperwork." She took a sip of her coffee. "Identity misuse in a family structure is common." She continued, "It relies on trust. Or, more accurately, it relies on the assumption that the victim won't check. It is plausible deniability. If the IRS comes calling, your father can say, 'Well, it is Julia's company. Look, it is her name. It is her signature. But I didn't sign anything.'" I said. Marin looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "Are you sure? Think back. Tax forms, trust documents, power of attorney for a sick relative, college loan applications. How many times have you signed a piece of paper your father put in front of you without reading the 3rd paragraph?" The memory of Christmas Eve flashed in my mind. "Just sign this. Jules, it is for the trust." I felt sick. 12 times. I whispered, "Maybe more." "That is all it takes," Marin said. "One signature on a statement of information form, and he can register an LLC in your name. He can open a bank account. He can file taxes, and you would never know until the audit hits." She pulled a laptop out of her canvas bag. "Let us look," she said. "The Secretary of State business search is public record. If this entity exists, it is in the database." I watched her type. The cafe was noisy. The hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of students, but I felt sealed in a bubble of silence. "Here we go," Marin said. She turned the laptop toward me. Entity name, Bailey J. Consulting, LLC. Status, active. Date of formation, August 12, 2018. Registered agent, Julia Bailey. Mailing address, 404 Elm Street. Apartment 3B, Port Alder. I stared at the screen. The address hit me harder than the name. August 2018. I was 25. I had just finished my master's degree. I wanted to move out of the family estate, but rent in Port Alder was astronomical. My father had surprised me. He said he found a great little studio in a building a friend owned. He paid the deposit. He handled the lease. He said it was his graduation gift to me, a way to help me get on my feet. I lived there for 6 months. He didn't help me get an apartment because he was proud of me. I said, my voice sounding hollow. He helped me get it so he had a mailing address for the shell company. Marin watched me, her expression soft but unyielding. It is a classic move. She said, it separates the address from him. If anyone investigates, the mail goes to your old apartment, not his office. Did you ever forward your mail when you moved out? No. I realized. Dad said he would handle the utilities and the mail forwarding. He said he had a guy. Of course he did. Marin said. She closed the laptop. This is serious. Julia, this company has been active for 7 years. If they are running kickbacks through it, the tax liability alone could bankrupt you. And that is before we get to the fraud charges. What do? I asked. Do I go to the police? Not yet. Marin said, if you go to the police now, your father's lawyers will spin it. They will say you are confused or vindictive. We need more than a single transfer. We need to prove you didn't control the account. We need to see where the money went after it hit that LLC. She handed me a list of documents. I need your tax returns for the last 7 years. I need your bank statements. And if you can, I need you to find out who else is paying Bailey J. Consulting. I looked at the list. It felt like homework for a funeral. I have to act normal. Don't I? I asked. Marin nodded. You have to be the Julia they expect, the quiet one, the one who does the filing and doesn't ask questions. If they smell fear, they will close ranks. I left the cafe an hour later. My world tilted on its axis. The fog had lifted, revealing a gray, flat sky. I drove toward the city center. But I didn't go home. I needed to see him, not my father. I couldn't look at Graham Bailey without vomiting. But Evan. I needed to know if my brother was the heir to the cruelty, or just another victim of it. I found Evan at the Bailey Development Group headquarters. It was a glass monolith downtown, the kind of building that screamed power. I didn't have a badge, but the security guard, old Mr. Henderson, no relation to the contractor, waved me through. Hi, Miss Julia. Looking sharp today. I smiled. A painful stretching of my lips. Thanks. Earl, is Evan in? He is on the 12th floor, reviewing the blueprints for the marina. I took the elevator up. The silence of the lift gave me time to compose my face. I had to be cute office stuff Julia. I had to be the sister who stopped by for a coffee. Evan's office was a corner suite with a view of the river. He was standing over a large drafting table, his sleeves rolled up, a phone pressed to his ear. No, I told you, the permit covers the retaining wall. If the inspector gives you grief, call Arthur. That is what we pay him for. He hung up and turned around. Seeing me in the doorway, he looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes that the gala lighting had hidden. Jules, he said, surprised. What are you doing here? Dad send you? No, I said, walking in and sitting on one of the plush visitor chairs. I was just nearby, grabbing lunch. Thought I would say hi. Evan sighed, rubbing his temples. I don't have time for lunch. The marina project is a nightmare. The ground soil is unstable. We are 2 weeks behind. He sat on the edge of his desk, looking at me. You okay? He asked. You left early last night. Dad was Dad. He was cruel. I said. Evan shrugged, a gesture of learned helplessness. He likes a show. You know that. Don't take it personally. He told the board this morning that you are the most meticulous compliance officer he knows. He brags about you when you aren't in the room. It was a lie. A comforting, brotherly lie. I picked at a loose thread on the armrest of the chair. Evan, I said, keeping my voice casual, I got a weird letter in the mail today. Something about a consulting firm? Bailey J. Consulting? I watched him. I watched his hands, his eyes, the tension in his jaw. For a microsecond. He froze. It was almost imperceptible. His eyes flicked to the door, then back to me. Never heard of it, he said. His voice was too quick, too clipped. Really? I asked. It had my name on it. I thought maybe Dad set something up for tax purposes years ago. You know how he is with trusts. Evan stood up and walked back to the drafting table. Turning his back to me, Dad handles those things. Julia, you know that. The estate planning is complicated. It is probably just a holding entity for some assets. I wouldn't worry about it. He grabbed a pencil and made a meaningless mark on the blueprint. But it had an address on it. I pressed. My old apartment on Elm Street. Evan spun around. The tiredness was gone, replaced by a sharp, cold irritation. Julia, stop, he said. Stop what? Stop digging. The room went silent. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to get louder. He walked over to me, leaning down so his face was level with mine. It wasn't a threat. Exactly. It was a plea wrapped in a warning. Look, he said softly. Dad is under a lot of pressure right now. The interest rates are killing the margins on the new developments. He is moving things around to keep the lights on. If you start asking questions about boring tax paperwork, you are going to make him angry. And when he gets angry, things get hard for everyone. He looked at me with eyes that were pleading with me to be complicit. Just let him handle the money. Jules, you have a nice life. You have a nice job. Don't embarrass the family by making a scene over nothing. I looked at my brother. I saw the fear in him. He knew. He absolutely knew. He might not know the details, but he knew the game, and he had decided that survival meant playing along. Okay, I whispered. I won't ask him. Evan exhaled. A long breath of relief. Good. That is good. Now, go get some lunch. I have to call the concrete guys back. I walked out of the building feeling colder than I had when I entered. Evan hadn't just dismissed me. He had confirmed it. Don't embarrass. The family was code for don't expose the crime. 2 days later, I was back in the presence of Senator Wexford. This meeting was not in a hotel ballroom. It was in her district office, a nondescript suite in a strip mall near the highway. It smelled of toner and cheap coffee. The walls were covered in maps of the district and whiteboards filled with scheduling grids. Wexford was sitting behind a desk cluttered with files. She wasn't wearing a gala gown. She was wearing a cardigan and reading glasses. She looked tired, human, and formidable. Julia, she said, gesturing to a chair. Thank you for coming. I didn't sit. I stood by the door, feeling the urge to run. I saw Maren Klein. I said. Wexford nodded. I know. She told me you are taking steps. I found an LLC. I said, it is in my name. It has been active since 2018. Wexford took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. I am sorry. Julia, I truly am. I wish I could say I was surprised. I walked further into the room. You said you needed a risk analyst. I said, you said you needed to know the mechanism. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. I had spent the last 48 hours doing things that would get me fired instantly if I were caught. I had queried the Larkwell vendor database for every payment made to any entity with consulting in the name. It is not just Bailey J. Consulting. I said, placing the folder on her desk. There are 3 others. Northridge Strategic Partners, the Alder Group, Portside Advisory. Wexford opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the spreadsheets I had compiled. They all have different tax ID numbers. I explained, but they all share something. They all bill on a bi-weekly cadence that aligns perfectly with the accounts payable draw from the Alderbridge Foundation. Wexford looked up. The foundation? I nodded. Larkwell pays the consultants. The consultants, me, apparently, transfer the funds to the foundation as charitable donations, and the foundation, Pays the Bailey Development Group for project management fees. Wexford finished. I felt a lump in my throat. It is a washing machine. My father uses the hospital's money to pay himself, and he uses his charity to make it tax-deductible, and he uses my name to sign the checks. Wexford closed the folder. She looked at me with a profound sadness. Politics is a machine that chews up people. Julia, she said softly, I have been in this game for 30 years. I have seen families destroyed for less money than this. I am not going to lie to you and tell you that this is going to be easy, or that you won't get hurt. She stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against the edge of it. If we pursue this, your father will fight. He will attack your character. He will attack your sanity. He will make you feel small. He already does that. I said. Wexford smiled. A dry, humorless expression. Yes, but this will be public. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Aren't you supposed to be convincing me to testify? I am, Wexford said, but I need you to walk into this with your eyes open. If you do this, you are burning down the house you grew up in. I thought about the gala. I thought of the word worthless. I thought of the fake apartment. The house is already burned. I said, I am just the only one who smells the smoke. Tessa Marr entered the room then, carrying a tray of water bottles. She paused when she saw the tension in the room. Tessa, Wexford said. Tell her. Tessa set the tray down. She looked at me, her professional mask slipping just a fraction. You don't remember me, do you? Tessa asked. I looked at her closely. The bob cut, the sharp suit. No, I am sorry. Tessa smiled. A genuine, slightly sad smile. 10 years ago, the Port Alder Future Leaders Scholarship Program. We were both finalists. You were in grad school. I was a senior in college. I searched my memory. It was a hazy summer. My father had forced me to apply for the scholarship, even though we didn't need the money, because it looked good for the family brand. I remember the program. I said, we had a group project. Tessa said, we had to build a budget for a mock nonprofit. The software crashed the night before the presentation. Everyone panicked. The guys on the team wanted to just make up the numbers. She took a step closer. But you didn't let them. You stayed up until 4 a.m. rebuilding the spreadsheet cell by cell. You fixed everyone's mistakes. You saved the presentation. I stared at her. I vaguely remembered that night. I remembered the fatigue. I remembered the feeling that if I didn't fix it, no one would. You were the girl who stayed late to fix the spreadsheets. Tessa said, you were brilliant, Julia, and you were kind. You helped me with my part even though you were exhausted. I never forgot that. She looked at Wexford, then back at me. When the senator told me we were investigating the Bailey family, I told her, Julia isn't one of them. I told her you were the one person in that family who actually cared about the work. I felt a stinging sensation behind my eyes. I had spent my entire adult life feeling invisible, feeling like my competence was a defect, something that made me boring and cute, but someone had seen me, 10 years ago, in a library at 4 a.m. This woman had seen me. Thank you, I whispered. Tessa nodded. We aren't using you. Julia, we are betting on you. I left the office with a new kind of resolve. It wasn't anger anymore. It was validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't useless. I was competent, and competence was a weapon. I went straight to Larkwell Health. It was late afternoon. The administrative wing was quiet. I logged into my terminal, my heart beating a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I needed to trace the Alderbridge connection. I knew the money went into the foundation, but where did it go from there? I pulled the vendor files for the last 3 years. I cross-referenced them with the Foundation's Public 990 tax filings, which were available online. It took me 2 hours. The sun set outside my window, casting long shadows across the gray carpet of my cubicle. The pattern was intricate. The Foundation paid out grants to community partners. But when I looked up the partners, they were all construction subcontractors. Dover Ridge Concrete, Northside Electrical, Bayside Glass, and then the smoking gun. a recurring monthly payment from the Alderbridge Foundation to a vendor listed as Holt Associates Legal Retainer. Darren Holt, the family lawyer. The foundation wasn't just paying for construction, it was paying the family's legal bills. It was paying for the PR firm that managed Evan's image. It was paying for the country club memberships, disguised as donor cultivation expenses. It was a slush fund, a massive tax-exempt piggy bank that my father used to subsidize his lifestyle while pretending to save the city. My phone buzzed on the desk. Dad. I stared at the screen. The name flashed, demanding attention. I picked it up. Hello? Julia. Graham's voice was warm, almost affectionate. Where are you? I am at work, Dad, finishing up some reports. Good. Hard worker. Listen, I want you to come over for dinner tonight. Just family. Just us. I feel like we got off on the wrong foot at the gala, and I want to make it up to you. I hesitated. My instincts screamed trap. I am really tired. Dad, please. Jules, Mom's pot roast recipe. The cook made it special. Just come by for an hour. We need to talk. The softness in his voice was disarming. Part of me, the part that was still 5 years old and wanted him to pick me up, wanted to believe him. Okay, I said. I will be there at 7. I arrived at the Bailey estate at 7:05. The house was a sprawling colonial revival on the cliffs overlooking the bay. It was beautiful and imposing, a fortress of brick and ivy. I walked into the dining room, expecting to see my father and maybe Evan. I stopped in the doorway. The table was set with the good linen, the heavy damask napkins we used for Thanksgiving. My father sat at the head of the table. Evan was to his right, but there were 2 other people. Darren Holt, the family attorney, sat to Evan's right. He was a small, wire-thin man with eyes like polished stones. And across from him sat Mina Voss. Mina was the director of the Alderbridge Foundation. She was a poised, sharp woman who always looked like she was posing for a brochure. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a board meeting. Julia. Graham stood up, arms wide. Come in. You know everyone. I walked in slowly, my bag heavy on my shoulder. Hi, Dad, Evan, Darren, Mina. I took the empty seat opposite Evan. The table felt enormous. We were just talking about how hard you have been working, Graham said, pouring me a glass of wine I didn't ask for. Evan says you are looking a little peaked, stressed. I looked at Evan. He was staring at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. I am fine, I said, just busy. Of course, Graham said soothingly. That is the problem, isn't it? You take on too much. You always have. You worry about every little detail. He sat down and folded his hands on the table. Mina tells me the foundation is looking for a new liaison for the hospital partnership. Graham said, a less demanding role, more ceremonial. Mina Voss smiled. It would be a great opportunity. Julia, we could really use a Bailey face on the project. And the travel schedule is very light. I looked between them. They were trying to move me. They were trying to take me out of compliance and put me in a role where I wouldn't see the invoices. I like my job. I said clearly. Graham sighed. He looked at Darren Holt. Darren cleared his throat. He opened a slim leather folder in front of him. Julia, he said, his voice dry and professional. Your father is concerned about your health. We all are. We think you need a break. A sabbatical. He slid a document across the polished mahogany table. It stopped perfectly in front of me. I looked down. Confidentiality and severance agreement. It wasn't a job offer. It was a golden handcuffs deal. What is this? I asked. It is a support package, Darren said. The family wants to set up a trust for you. A stipend, $10,000 a month, tax-free, plus a fully paid 6-month sabbatical to travel. Europe? Asia? Wherever you want to go. I read the text upside down. Agrees to maintain strict confidentiality regarding all financial and operational matters of Bailey Development Group, Larkwell Health, and the Alderbridge Foundation. Agrees not to disparage the family or its entities. My stomach twisted. They knew. They absolutely knew. You want me to sign an NDA? I said, To have dinner with my father. Graham leaned forward. His face was a mask of concern, but his eyes were hard. It is not an NDA. Sweetheart, it is privacy protection. We are a public family. We just want to make sure that our private matters stay private, especially with all this noise going on in the city. He meant Wexford. He meant the investigation. Evan finally looked up. Take the sabbatical. Jules, he said softly, go to Italy. You have always wanted to go to Italy. Just get away from the stress. I looked at the document. It was a bribe. It was a beautiful, expensive bribe designed to buy my silence and ship me out of the country until the investigation blew over. If I signed this, I was safe. I would have money. I would have Italy. I would have my father's approval, but I would also be owning the lie. If I signed this, I was admitting that I was Bailey J. Consulting. I was admitting that I was the one who needed to be silenced. The room was silent. They were all watching me. Graham with his expectation of obedience, Evan with his guilt, Darren and Mina with their professional indifference. I realized then that the insult at the gala, worthless, wasn't the worst thing he could do to me. He thought I was cheap. He thought my integrity was something he could buy for $10,000 a month and a plane ticket. He thought I was so desperate for his love that I would sell my soul just to keep sitting at this table. I felt a sudden, cold clarity. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't flip the table. I reached out and picked up the document. Julia, Graham said, his voice hopeful. Do you have a pen? I folded the document in half, then in half again. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor. A harsh sound in the quiet room. I am not signing this. Dad, I said. My voice was soft, but it didn't shake. Graham's smile faltered. Now, Julia, let us not be dramatic. Read the terms. It is very generous. I don't want your money. I said, and I don't want a sabbatical. I looked at Evan. I am sorry you are so afraid of him. Evan, but I am not anymore. Evan flinched as if I had slapped him. Graham stood up slowly. His face darkened. The benevolent patriarch was gone. The bully was back. You sit down, he commanded. You do not walk out of this room until we settle this. You are confused. Julia, you are not thinking clearly. I am thinking more clearly than I have in years. I said. I clutched the folded document in my hand. Darren Holt spoke up. Ms. Bailey, that document is privileged attorney-client work product. You cannot take it with you. I looked at the lawyer. I looked at the man who had helped my father build this cage around me. I tucked the folded paper into my purse. I need my own copy. I said. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I heard my father shouting my name. Julia, you get back here. You are making a mistake. You are going to regret this. I walked through the foyer. I walked out the heavy front door. I walked to my car. My hands were trembling as I fumbled with the keys. But I got the engine started. I backed out of the driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires. I looked back at the house one last time. It looked golden and warm against the night sky. A perfect American home. I drove away. I had the document. I had the proof that they tried to buy me. And tomorrow, I was going to give it to Marin Klein. I wasn't worthless. I was expensive. And the price was going to be everything they had. My life became a series of timestamps. Before the gala, I lived in a blur of routine. Wake up, commute, work, deflect my father's passive-aggressive comments. Sleep, now. I lived in high resolution. Every conversation was a data point. Every piece of paper that crossed my desk at Larkwell Health was a potential exhibit. I stopped being a daughter and started being what I was paid to be. A risk analyst. I bought a secondary phone, a cheap burner model that I kept hidden in the hollowed-out bottom of a winter boot in my closet. I used it to photograph documents. When my father emailed me about family dinner schedules, I archived it in a secure cloud folder Marin Klein had set up. When Evan sent me a text asking how I was doing, I didn't just reply. I screenshotted it, timestamped it, and filed it under external pressure. I was done being the only honest person in the room without a shield. Marin Klein was teaching me the art of the paper trail. If you cannot record the conversation, record the summary, she told me over coffee in her office, which was piled high with banker's boxes. Send an email to yourself immediately after the interaction. Per our conversation at 2 p.m. today, you requested I sign the backdated form. It creates a contemporaneous record. It holds up in court better than memory. So I documented the way the CFO at Larkwell looked nervous when I asked for the vendor history on the new surgical wing. I documented the sudden appearance of a compliance audit regarding my own expense reports. A clear warning shot from HR. I was building a wall. Brick by boring brick. On a Tuesday evening, I met Senator Wexford's team again. We gathered in a conference room in the basement of the State House Annex. A room with no windows and a humming ventilation system. Tessa Marr was there, looking exhausted but sharp. She projected a digital map onto the whiteboard. It was not a map of the city. It was a map of money. We have finished tracing the Alderbridge Foundation outflows for the last fiscal year, Tessa said. I looked at the web of lines. It was dense, intricate, and nauseatingly smart. It wasn't a Ponzi scheme. It wasn't a smash and grab. It was a parasitic ecosystem. Here is the pattern, Wexford said. Standing by the screen, she pointed to a blue circle labeled City Infrastructure Grant. The city awards $2 million to fix the drainage in the Lowland District. She traced a line to a red square. Bailey Development Group wins the bid. She continued. They subcontract the actual work to 3 smaller firms. Those firms are legitimate, but they are squeezed. They do the work for $800,000. So where does the rest go? I asked. Management fees? Tessa answered. Consulting retainers. Change orders for unforeseen environmental delays. She pointed to a cluster of small gray dots. These are the shell entities. J. Bailey Consulting. Northridge. Strategic. The Alder Group. They bill the project for advisory services. $5,000 here, $10,000 there. It is never a huge amount at once. It is never enough to trigger a federal audit on its own. It is just leakage. It is realistic. I murmured. Exactly, Wexford said. It is boring. It is the kind of theft that looks like administrative bloat. But look at the total. She tapped the bottom of the screen. Annual estimated diversion, $4.2 million. $4 million a year. Siphoned out of roads, out of schools, out of the hospital where I worked. It goes into the foundation, Tessa explained. And from the foundation, it pays for the lifestyle, the jet usage, the legal retainers, the donor cultivation parties. I stared at the name J. Bailey Consulting on the screen. It was one of the largest intake valves. I am the funnel, I said, my voice flat. You are the glove, Wexford corrected gently. They use your clean hands to touch the dirty money. She sat down across from me. There is something else. Julia, I looked at her. What? We dug into the history of the Alderbridge Foundation. We wanted to see when the pattern started. It goes back about 15 years. But there was a gap. A gap? 12 years ago. For about 6 months. The suspicious transfers stopped. The consulting fees dried up. The foundation actually spent 90% of its budget on direct community aid. What happened 12 years ago? I asked. Your mother, Wexford said. The air left the room. My mother, Caroline Bailey, had died of an aneurysm 10 years ago. In my memory, she was a soft, quiet woman, a decorative wife who arranged flowers and smoothed over my father's temper. Graham always talked about her with a patronizing reverence. Your mother was an angel. She was too fragile for this world. She didn't understand the hard realities of business. Caroline Bailey was appointed to the Civic Ethics Committee 12 years ago. Wexford said, it was a minor municipal board. Your father pushed for it because he thought it would look good for the family to have a seat at the table. And she took it seriously, Wexford said. She started asking questions about donor influence on zoning boards. She started tracking the very same patterns we are looking at now. I shook my head. No, my mother didn't do that. She just hosted teas. Dad said she resigned because the stress gave her migraines. Wexford slid a file toward me. It was a photocopy of meeting minutes from the city clerk's office. Council member Caroline Bailey raised an objection to the expedited approval of the riverfront permit. Citing a potential conflict of interest regarding the undisclosed donors to the mayor's re-election fund, I read the words. They were dry, bureaucratic, and explosive. She didn't resign because of migraines. Julia, Wexford said softly. She resigned because she threatened to go public, and your father shut her down. The transfer stopped for 6 months because she made him stop, and then she died. I whispered, 2 years later. Yes, Wexford said, and once she was gone, the machine turned back on, harder than before. I sat there, staring at the minutes. My father had rewritten her history. He had turned her moral courage into fragility. He had turned her ethical stance into confusion. He had gaslighted me about my own mother for a decade. She didn't understand the hard realities. No, she understood them perfectly, and she had tried to fight him. I went to the family estate that weekend. I told Evan I was coming to pick up some winter coats from storage. It was a lie, but a plausible one. The house was quiet. Graham was golfing. Evan was at the office, frantically trying to plug the holes I was secretly widening. I went straight to the attic. It was a cavernous space, smelling of cedar and dry heat. It was filled with the detritus of a wealthy life, antique furniture that had fallen out of fashion, boxes of tax records, racks of garment bags. I found her trunk in the corner, under a dust sheet. It was a heavy brass-bound steamer trunk that she had brought into the marriage. I opened it. Inside were the artifacts of the woman she was allowed to be. Silk scarves, photo albums of vacations in Aspen, a collection of porcelain figurines. I dug deeper. I lifted the tray of scarves. I felt along the bottom of the lining. My mother was a woman who lived in a house where privacy was a luxury. If she had secrets, she would have hidden them well. I found a slit in the velvet lining at the bottom. My fingers brushed against paper. I pulled out a thin manila folder. It was unmarked. I sat on the dusty floorboards and opened it. It wasn't a ledger. It wasn't a manifesto. It was a collection of letters, handwritten, addressed to me and Evan, but never mailed. My darling Julia, October 14th, 2014. I watched you at the debate tournament today. You were so fierce. You argued for the unpopular side because you said the facts supported it. Your father was annoyed. He wanted you to smile more. But I was so proud. You have a spine made of something stronger than what holds this house together. Never let them convince you that your voice is a noise complaint. Telling the truth is lonely, especially when the room punishes you for it. But the silence? The silence is worse. The silence eats you from the inside. I wish I could tell you what I know, but I am afraid. Not for me, but for you. If I burn it down, the fire will catch you too. I read the next one. Evan is becoming like him. I see it in his eyes. He mistakes compliance for loyalty. He thinks that if he follows the rules of the house will protect him. He doesn't see that the house is the danger. And another, dated 2 weeks before she died. I am tired of being the fragile one. I am tired of the migraines being the excuse for why I cannot look at the checkbook. I know where the money goes. Graham, I know what you are doing to the hospital contracts. One day, Julia will see it. She is the one who notices details. God help you when she does. I sat in the attic for an hour, tears streaming down my face. She hadn't been weak. She had been a hostage. She had stayed to protect us. She had swallowed the truth to keep the peace, and it had killed her. God help you when she does. I wiped my face. The sadness was still there, but it was hardening into something else. It was calcifying into rage. I wasn't just fighting for my own name anymore. I was fighting for hers. I took the folder. I didn't hide it in my coat. I put it in my bag. I wasn't stealing it. It belonged to me. It was my inheritance, the only inheritance that mattered. The change in me wasn't a montage. I didn't cut my hair or start wearing leather jackets. It was quieter than that. I stopped apologizing. When I went to Sunday dinner 2 days later, Graham interrupted me while I was talking about a new regulation at the hospital. Usually, I would stop, nod, and let him pivot the conversation to his latest golf score. This time, I kept talking. So the new federal guidelines require a triple-blind review process. I said, my voice steady. Graham spoke over me. Boring. Julia, pass the salt. I didn't pass the salt. I am not finished. Dad. I said. The table went silent. Evan looked up from his plate, his fork halfway to his mouth. Graham stared at me, his eyes narrowing. Excuse me? Graham said. I am telling you about my week. I said. You asked, so I am answering. The guidelines are strict. They are cracking down on third-party vendors who lack transparency. It is going to be a problem for anyone who relies on handshake deals. I held his gaze. I didn't blink. I didn't smile the apologetic daughter smile. Graham looked at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. He was looking for the crack. He was looking for the insecure girl who craved his approval. He didn't find her. He cleared his throat and looked away first. Well, he muttered. Sounds tedious. It is, I said, finally picking up the salt shaker and placing it within his reach. But the law usually is. I saw Evan watching me. He didn't look impressed. He looked terrified. He cornered me the next day. I was leaving my apartment building, heading to work. Evan was waiting in his car, parked in the loading zone. He rolled down the window. Get in, he said. I have to go to work. Evan, I said get in. Please. I got in. The car smelled of new leather and anxiety. Evan drove us 2 blocks and parked in an alley behind a bakery. He killed the engine and turned to me. What are you doing? He asked. His voice was tight, strung out. I don't know what you mean. I said, don't give me that. The attitude at dinner? The questions you are asking at Larkwell? Dad is noticing. Julia, he is asking me if I need to handle you. Let him try. I said. Evan hit the steering wheel with the palm of his hand. It was a sharp, violent sound. This isn't a game, he hissed. Do you have any idea how fragile the leverage is right now? The interest rates are up. The lenders are squeezing us. If the foundation money stops flowing, the debt service payments on the marina project default. If we default, the banks call the loans on the entire portfolio. So it is a Ponzi scheme. I said, you are paying old debts with new stolen money. It is not stolen, Evan shouted. Then he lowered his voice, looking around wildly as if the car were bugged. It is leveraged. It is how things are done. Julia, everyone does it. The city knows. The contractors know. It is how the skyline gets built. It is fraud. Evan, and you are using my name to do it. Evan looked at me, his eyes pleading. We did it to protect you, he said. I laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. Protect me? By making me the fall guy? We gave you a trust fund. We gave you a career. Dad loves you, in his own way. He needs control. He needs a scapegoat. I said. Evan took a breath. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper. He threw it on my lap. It was the Port Alder Sentinel. Look at page 4. He said. I opened the paper. There was a list of donors for the upcoming state senate race. The article was analyzing the funding for Senator Wexford's opponent, a hardline pro-business candidate named Marcus Thorne. I scanned the list. Top individual donors: Graham Bailey, Evan Bailey, Julia Bailey. I froze. I didn't donate to Marcus Thorne. I said, I hate Marcus Thorne. He wants to dismantle the Healthcare Oversight Board. You donated $2,000 last week, Evan said coldly. Or, at least, your credit card did. I looked at him. You used my card? Dad has your numbers. Julia, he has had them since you were 18. He wanted to boost Thorne's numbers before the filing deadline. Why? I asked. Why does it matter? Because Thorne is running a campaign based on attacking Senator Wexford's integrity, Evan said. He is accusing her of being soft on crime and anti-development. He leaned in. Think about how it looks. Jules, you are secretly talking to Wexford, but on paper, you are a maxed-out donor to her rival. I felt the blood drain from my face. If I testify, I whispered. If you testify, Evan said, Dad's lawyers will paint you as a political operative. They will say you are a confused woman playing both sides, or worse. They will say you are a Thorne supporter who tried to infiltrate Wexford's investigation to sabotage it. He sat back. You are compromised. Julia, before you even open your mouth, I stared at the newspaper. It was brilliant. It was evil. By donating in my name to Wexford's enemy, they had destroyed my credibility as a witness. If I cooperate with Wexford now, I look like a double agent. Just stop, Evan said. His voice broke. Please, just stop digging. If you bring this down, you aren't just hurting Dad. You are destroying me. I signed those papers too. Julia, I am in just as deep as he is. He looked at me with the eyes of a drowning man who was willing to pull me under to stay afloat. You are my sister, he whispered. Don't destroy the family. I opened the car door. The family is already destroyed. Evan, I said, you just haven't looked at the wreckage yet. I brought the newspaper to Wexford. We met in the safe house this time, a small apartment in the suburbs that Tessa Marr used for sensitive interviews. Wexford looked at the donor list. She didn't look surprised. She looked weary. He is good, she admitted. He is planting landmines in your path. Can I still testify? I asked. Wexford took off her glasses. You can, she said, but it will be brutal. They will use this donation to impeach your character on the stand. They will ask you why you funded the man trying to take my job while you were sitting in my office giving me evidence. I didn't fund him. I said, it was identity theft. But can you prove it? Wexford asked. Did you file a police report when the charge appeared? No, I realized I hadn't checked my credit card statement yet. Then it is your word against the receipt, Wexford said. She stood up and walked to the window. Looking out at the rain-slicked street, there is another way. Julia, what? We can take a sealed deposition. You give your testimony in private. With a judge present, we seal it. We don't use it until we have corroborating financial evidence from the banks. We use your testimony to get the warrants. But we keep your name out of the initial indictment. I felt a surge of hope. So I stay anonymous? For a while. Wexford said. But eventually, if we go to trial, the seal breaks. Your father will know. And he will know that you were the one who gave us the keys. I sat there, twisting the strap of my bag. It wasn't just about the legal risk anymore. It was the primal fear of the confrontation. The moment when the father looks at the child and sees an enemy, I am not ready, I said softly. Wexford nodded. I understand. But Julia? The clock is ticking. Thorne is gaining in the polls. If he wins the election, this investigation goes away, and your father wins. 2 days later, the Alderbridge Foundation held its annual town hall. It was a public event at the city center auditorium. It was supposed to be a celebration of their community impact. I wasn't going to go. I wanted to stay in my apartment and stare at the wall. But Graham had called me that morning. I want you there. Julia, front row. It is important for the family to show unity, especially with all these rumors flying around. He didn't ask. He commanded. So I went. I wore the navy suit. I sat in the front row next to Evan, who smelled of breath mints and fear. The auditorium was packed. My father stood on stage, bathed in warm lighting. Behind him was a massive banner. Integrity in action. The irony made my teeth ache. He gave a speech about community, about sacrifice, about the legacy of the Bailey name. He spoke about the new library annex, paid for with laundered money. He spoke about the park renovation, managed by a shell company. And then he pivoted. You know, he said, his voice dropping to that intimate, conversational tone he mastered. A man is only as good as the people beside him. I am blessed with a team that values truth above all else. He looked down at the front row. My son, Evan. Applause. Evan waved, his smile tight. And, Graham said, his eyes locking onto mine. My daughter, Julia. The spotlight swung. It hit me. Come up here. Julia, he said. I froze. This wasn't in the script. Come on, Graham beckoned, smiling like a proud papa. Don't be shy. The crowd clapped. I had no choice. If I refused, I created a scene. If I created a scene, I looked unstable. I stood up. My legs felt like lead. I walked up the stairs to the stage. Graham put his arm around my shoulders. He pulled me in close. Too close. Julia is the conscience of our family. Graham told the crowd. He squeezed my shoulder. His grip was iron. She works in compliance. She makes sure we cross every T and dot every I. She keeps us honest. The crowd cheered. They saw a loving father praising his professional daughter. I saw a predator using his prey as a shield. He was parading me. He was telling the world, look, she is right here. She is on my team. If there was fraud, surely the conscience of the family would have said something. He was making me complicit in public. I stood there, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw reporters. I saw cameras. I saw a photographer from the Sentinel crouch down and snap a picture. Me, my father. The banner reading integrity in action looming over our heads. I felt nauseous. I felt like I was suffocating. Graham leaned down, pretending to kiss my cheek. Smile. Jules, he whispered into my ear. You are on camera. Don't look guilty. I realized then that he knew. He knew I was talking to Wexford. He knew about the investigation. This wasn't just PR. This was a warning. I own your image. I own your narrative. You are mine. I walked off that stage with my soul feeling bruised. I went straight home. I needed to shower. I needed to scrub the feeling of his hand off my shoulder. I walked down the hallway to my apartment door. I reached for my keys, but I stopped. The door was ajar. Just an inch. The deadbolt was disengaged. I stood there, my heart hammering. I hadn't left it open. I was meticulous. I checked the lock 3 times every morning. I pushed the door open slowly. Hello? I called out. My voice trembled. The apartment was silent. I walked in. I expected to see the place trashed. Drawers overturned, laptop stolen, furniture slashed. But it was pristine. The TV was where I left it. My laptop was on the desk. My jewelry box on the dresser was untouched. I walked into the kitchen. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Then I saw it. My kitchen table was empty, except for one thing. The manila folder. The letters from my mother. I had left that folder hidden under my mattress, buried deep. Now, it was sitting perfectly centered on the placemat on the kitchen table. It was aligned parallel to the edge of the table, precise, deliberate. I walked over to it. I didn't touch it. It was a message. They hadn't taken anything. They hadn't broken anything. They had simply moved the most private, sacred thing I owned from a place of safety to a place of exposure. We can get in. We know what you have. We can touch you whenever we want. It was a violation far worse than a robbery. A robbery is about value. This was about power. I looked at the folder. My mother's words were inside. The silence eats you from the inside. I realized my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a terrifying, cold certainty. They thought this would scare me into silence. They thought that by showing me they could enter my sanctuary. I would retreat. They were wrong. They had just confirmed that I had no sanctuary left to lose. I picked up the folder. I put it in my bag. I took out my burner phone. I dialed Marin Klein. It was late, but she answered on the second ring. Klein, it is Julia. I said, Are you okay? You sound... I am ready. I said, Ready for what? The deposition. The testimony. Everything. There was a pause on the line. Are you sure? Marin asked. Once we start this, Julia, there is no going back. I looked at the empty space on the table where they had placed the letters. I know. I said, Call Wexford. I want to burn it down. The morning after the break-in, the world looked exactly the same, which was the most terrifying part. The sun still hit the brick facade of my apartment building. The barista at the corner coffee shop still spelled my name wrong on the cup. But the air felt different, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. I met Maren Klein at her office in Ridgeway Harbor. It was barely an office. It was a converted storage room behind a dry cleaner, filled with floor-to-ceiling filing cabinets and smelling faintly of steam and starch. It was the kind of place you went when you didn't want to be found. Maren listened to my description of the kitchen table, the misplaced folder, the lack of forced entry, the pristine silence of the threat. She didn't look surprised. She looked like a mechanic diagnosing a transmission failure she had seen 1,000 times. "I called the building manager," Maren said, leaning back in her creaky chair. "Mrs. Gable in 4B saw a maintenance worker on your floor around 2 in the afternoon. She didn't recognize him. Said he was wearing a gray uniform and a hat pulled low. She thought he was there to check the fire alarms. He wasn't checking the alarms." I said, my voice tight. "He was checking me." Maren nodded. "It is a standard intimidation tactic. Julia, it is called a soft touch. If they trash your apartment, you call the police. If they steal your laptop, you file a report. But moving a folder? That is gaslighting. If you tell the police, you sound paranoid. If you tell your friends, they think you are stressed. It isolates you." "It worked," I admitted. "I slept in my car last night." Maren leaned forward, her expression hardening. "You have to stop thinking like a private citizen," she said. "You are mourning the loss of a privacy that hasn't existed for a long time. They have your social security number. They have your bank records. They have the keys to your apartment, likely copied years ago." She tapped the desk with a pen. "You need to stop living like a person with privacy and start living like a person in a story that others are trying to control. Every move you make now is a scene. Every text you send is dialogue. If you want to survive this, you have to become the narrator." I looked at the stacks of files around us. I felt small. I felt like a paper doll in a hurricane. "How do I do that?" I asked. "You stop reacting," Maren said. "You start acting. You give Wexford the documents. You lock in your testimony, and you stop sleeping in your car. You go back to that apartment. You install a secondary deadbolt, and you live your life, not because you are safe, but because you refuse to be afraid." I took her advice. I didn't go back to the apartment immediately. Instead, I went to the safe house to meet Senator Wexford. The mood in the safe house was different this time. It wasn't the frantic energy of discovery. It was the heavy, grim atmosphere of calculation. The table was covered in the documents I had extracted from the Larkwell database, plus the physical evidence Maren and I had compiled. I laid the new batch on the table. "This is the incorporation phrasing for Bailey J. Consulting," I said, pointing to a highlighted paragraph. "It lists the primary purpose as Strategic Healthcare Advisory, but look at the signatory page." Wexford put on her glasses. "It is a digital signature." She noted. "Yes," I said, "but look at the timestamp metadata. It was signed on August 12th, 2018, at 4:30 in the afternoon." I pulled out a second document. "This is my employee time card from Larkwell for that same week, on August 12th, from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening. I was in an all-day compliance training seminar in the basement of the hospital. No electronics allowed." Wexford looked up, a spark of interest in her eyes. "You couldn't have signed it," she said. "I couldn't have signed it. I confirmed. And I have 3 witnesses who can place me in that seminar. It was a small detail, a boring administrative discrepancy, but in a fraud case. It was a smoking gun. It proved that someone else had used my credentials to execute the document. Tessa Marr took the papers and added them to the master file." "Good," she said. "This corroborates the identity theft. It separates you from the intent. But then—" Tessa hesitated. She looked at Wexford. "Senator, we need to show her the other thing." Wexford sighed. She looked tired. The lines around her mouth were deeper than usual. "Show her," Wexford said. Tessa typed a few commands into her laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet on the main monitor. "We traced the outflows from the Alderbridge Foundation," Tessa said. "We know about the slush fund payments to the legal firms and the consulting shells. That accounts for about 60% of the budget. And the rest?" I asked. Tessa pointed to a column of green figures. The rest is real. Julia. I stared at the screen. Northridge Community Clinic. $500,000. Port Alder Food Security Program. $300,000. After School Arts Initiative. $200,000. These aren't shell companies, Tessa said quietly. We checked. The clinic is real. It serves 4,000 uninsured patients a year. The food program feeds 500 families a week. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. My father was using the stolen money to do actual good. It was the perfect shield. If we freeze the foundation's assets, Wexford said, her voice heavy, those checks stop clearing. The clinic closes. The food bank runs out of supplies. The narrative won't be, Senator stops corruption. It will be, Senator starves children. I sat back in my chair. This was why Graham Bailey was invincible. He had taken the community hostage. He had wrapped his greed in the survival of the poor. He knows this, I said. He built it this way on purpose. If you attack him, you attack the city. Wexford nodded. It is a moral deadlock. If we indict him, we hurt innocent people. If we don't, he keeps stealing. I looked at the numbers. I thought about the clinic. I knew that clinic. Larkwell referred patients there all the time. It was a lifeline. I looked at the structure of the foundation. I looked at the bylaws. There is a way. I said. Wexford looked at me. To do what? To separate the host from the parasite. I said. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard. I grabbed a marker. You are thinking like prosecutors. I said. You are thinking about freezing the assets. That stops the flow of money entirely. I drew a box, but the foundation is a separate legal entity from the Bailey Development Group. I explained, it has its own charter. If you can prove that the board of directors, my father, Evan, Mina Voss, has breached their fiduciary duty by commingling funds, you don't have to shut it down. I drew a line cutting the box in half. You petition the Attorney General for an emergency receivership. I said, you ask the court to remove the current board immediately and appoint an independent trustee to manage the operations. I looked at Wexford. The trustee keeps the clinic open. The trustee pays the food bank, but the trustee stops paying the consulting fees. The trustee stops paying the legal retainers. You keep the good, and you starve the bad. The room was silent for a moment. Wexford looked at the whiteboard, then at me. Her expression wasn't just approval. It was respect. Receivership, she murmured. It is cleaner. It protects the victims, and it destroys his defense. I added, he cannot claim you are hurting the community if the community is still getting paid. You are just firing him. Tessa Marr smiled. That is brilliant. It is boring, technical, and brilliant. It is how a risk analyst thinks. I said, you don't blow up the building to put out the fire. You just cut the oxygen. Wexford stood up. Draft the motion. She told Tessa, we are going for receivership. I left the safe house feeling a strange sense of power. For the first time, my mind, my obsessive, detail-oriented, cute office stuff mind, wasn't a liability, it was a weapon. But the victory was short-lived. 2 days later, Evan reached out. He didn't text. He called me from a payphone. His voice was jagged, sounding like he had been swallowing glass. Meet me at the boat basin, he said. Please. Jules. I drove to the marina. The sky was a bruised purple. Threatening rain. The wind whipped off the water, smelling of brine and diesel. I found Evan sitting on a concrete bench near the pier where the yachts were docked. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His tie was undone. He looked 10 years older than he had at the gala. I sat down next to him, leaving a foot of space between us. You look terrible, I said. Evan laughed. A dry hacking sound. I feel terrible. I haven't slept in 3 days. The auditors are at the office. Not the government ones. The bank ones. He rubbed his face with his hands. It is worse than you think. Julia, he whispered. What is? The hole. The debt. He looked out at the water, refusing to meet my eyes. Dad isn't just skimming, he said. He is underwater. The waterfront development? It is 300% over budget. The loans are interest only, and the rates just doubled. We are bleeding cash. I stared at him. I thought it was just greed. I thought he was hoarding money. He is not hoarding it, Evan said. He is burning it. The foundation money isn't buying him a new plane. It is paying the interest on the loans from 20 years ago. It is paying the bribes to the zoning commissioners to keep the permits active so the banks don't foreclose. Evan turned to me. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. If the foundation money stops, the loans default. If the loans default, the company collapses. And not just the company, the pensions, the subcontractors, Mom's trust. It all goes to zero. He reached out and grabbed my hand. His palm was cold and clammy. We just need time. Jules, give us 6 months. We have a deal closing in June. A foreign investor. It will wipe out the debt. We can pay back the foundation. We can fix the paperwork. We can make it clean. Fix it quietly. I said, yes, Evan pleaded, quietly. Nobody has to go to jail. Nobody has to be ruined. Just slow down. Tell Wexford you were mistaken. Tell her the documents were drafts. Stall her. I looked at my brother. I saw the terrified boy he used to be, the one who was afraid of the dark. But I also saw a man who had made 1,000 small choices to look the other way. He was asking me to be the dam. He was asking me to hold back the flood with my own body so he could keep pretending he knew how to swim. I pulled my hand away. It is never going to be clean. Evan, I said, even if you pay it back, you used my name. You stole my identity to cover your mistakes. We didn't mean to hurt you, Evan cried. It was just paper. It wasn't just paper, I said, my voice rising over the wind. It was my life. You made me a criminal so you could be a vice president. Evan flinched. Jules, please, think about the family. Think about the humiliation. Dad will not survive this. It will kill him. I looked at the yachts bobbing in the water. I thought about the family. I thought about the dinners where I was ignored. The insults. The way they trained me to be small so I wouldn't take up too much space in their grand design. Whenever the men in this family make a mess, I said, my voice shaking with a sudden, cold fury. You hand me a broom and tell me to be polite while I sweep it up. You want me to carry the shame because you are too weak to carry the consequences. I stood up. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I am not the family trash can. Evan. Evan looked up at me, stunned. He had never heard me speak like that. He had never heard me refuse. Julia. He warned, his voice shifting from pleading to threatening. If you do this, you are out. You are dead to him. I looked down at him. I was never alive to him. Evan, I was just an asset, and now I am a liability. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I left him sitting on the bench, a man drowning in a sea of his own making, waiting for a tide that wasn't coming in. The next morning, the war moved from the shadows to the front page. I was at my desk at Larkwell, trying to focus on a legitimate audit, when my phone buzzed. It was a news alert. Port Alder. Ledger line. Procurement questions raised at Larkwell Health. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked the link. The article was vague, but the language was unmistakably familiar. Sources close to the investigation reveal that internal compliance protocols at Larkwell Health Cooperative are under review following reports of erratic billing audits. A recent anonymous memo, described by insiders as alarmist and statistically flawed, has triggered a review of vendor relationships. One senior administrator, speaking on condition of anonymity, suggested that the irregularities may stem from clerical errors within the compliance department itself. I dropped the phone. They were spinning it. They had leaked the existence of my memo. But they were framing it as incompetence, not whistleblowing. They were calling it statistically flawed. They were setting the stage to blame the clerical errors on the person who found them. The compliance department, that was me. My father was shaping the narrative. He was planting the seed in the public mind. Julia Bailey isn't a hero. She is a sloppy employee trying to cover her tracks. I felt a wave of nausea. I wanted to run to the bathroom and throw up, but I remembered Marin's words. Start living like a person in a story others want to control. I didn't run. I took a screenshot of the article. I emailed it to Marin with the subject line, retaliation. Then I went back to work. At noon, my personal email pinged. It was from Graham Bailey. Subject, breakfast, Julia. Meet me tomorrow at 8 a.m. at Briarstone. Just the two of us. We need to clear the air. Dad, I forwarded the email to Marin. Her response came back 2 minutes later. Take the meeting. We will wire you. This is the pivot point. Briarstone Country Club was the heart of the beast. It was where my father held court, where the deals were made, where the silence was bought with hollandaise sauce and Bloody Marys. I arrived at 7:55 a.m. I was wearing a recording device, a small, flat drive taped to the inside of my bra, wired to a microphone disguised as a button on my blouse. Marin had arranged it. Since I was a participant in the conversation, the law allowed me to record it. I felt the device warm against my skin. It was a terrifying, secret heartbeat. My father was already seated at his usual table by the window overlooking the 18th green. He looked rested. He looked like a man who had slept perfectly. Unlike Evan. "Julia!" he called out, half rising. "You look tired." "Sweetheart, sit, eat." I sat down. I ordered black coffee. "Dad," I said, "I saw the article in the Ledger line." Graham waved a hand dismissively. "Ah, yes. Unfortunate. The press loves a scandal, even when there isn't one." He took a sip of his juice. "That is actually why I wanted to see you," he said. He leaned forward, his face composing itself into an expression of fatherly concern. "I know things have been tense. Jules, I know I was hard on you at the gala. I apologize. The stress of the business. Sometimes I take it out on the people I love the most. It was a good performance. Almost perfect." I nodded slowly. "Thank you. I want to make it right." Graham said, "I have been thinking. You are too talented for that cubicle at Larkwell. You have a vision." He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a document this time. He pulled out a velvet box. He opened it. Inside was a gold lapel pin with the Alderbridge Foundation crest. "I want you to come on as the executive director of the foundation." He said, "Full control? You can run the programs. You can expand the clinic. You can be the face of the good work we do." He smiled. "We will announce it next week. Julia Bailey takes the helm. A fresh start. The salary is double what you make at the hospital." I looked at the pin. It was a badge of honor. It was a muzzle. If I took the job, I became the face of the fraud. I became the person responsible for the books I was currently trying to expose. "And if I don't want the job?" I asked. Graham's smile didn't fade, but his eyes went flat. The shark eyes. "Julia," he said softly, "be reasonable." He picked up his napkin and dabbed his mouth. "You don't want to stay at Larkwell," he said, "especially not with this investigation looming." "Why not?" "Because," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone picked up perfectly, "if people start digging into the vendor files, they are going to find some very messy things attached to your name." I froze. There it was. Bailey J. Consulting. He said, "It is a mess. Julia, I don't know how you got involved with that, but if the authorities see those transfers, it looks bad. It looks like embezzlement." My blood ran cold. He was doing it. He was explicitly threatening to frame me for the crime he committed. He was saying, "I will tell the world you stole the money unless you come work for me and help me hide it." "You are saying I set up that company?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the trembling of my hands under the table. Graham shrugged. "I am saying the paperwork has your signature. I am saying the checks went to an address you lived at. I am saying that if I were you. I would want a father who could protect me from that kind of misunderstanding." He reached out and patted my hand. "Come work for me. Jules, we bury the past. We move forward. We protect the family." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike. The man who had paid for my college. He wasn't protecting me. He was offering me a choice between being his accomplice or his victim. I pulled my hand away. "I will think about it, Dad," I said. "Good." Graham said. Take your time, but not too much time. The press is getting hungry. I left the club with the recording burning against my chest. I had him. I had the threat on tape. I had the proof of his coercion. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollowed out. I went home and locked the door. I engaged the deadbolt. I checked the windows. I sat on my couch in the dark. The day's adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a crushing exhaustion. I felt orphaned. I had a father, a brother, a home, and I had just set the charges to blow it all up. I was alone. I pulled out my phone. I didn't want to call Marin. I didn't want to call Wexford. I didn't know what I wanted. I opened my cloud backup. I scrolled back. Years back. I found it. A voicemail from 3 years ago. Mom. I pressed play. The voice filled the silent apartment. It was warm, slightly breathless. She must have been walking in the garden. Hi, honey. It is just Mom. I was just calling to see how your presentation went. I know you were nervous about it. But I just wanted to tell you, you are so smart. Julia, you work so hard. There was a pause, a soft laugh. You don't have to be perfect. Sweetheart, you are allowed to be proud of yourself. Just as you are, okay? Call me back. Love you. I let the phone drop to my lap. You are allowed to be proud of yourself. For 33 years, I had waited for Graham Bailey to tell me I was good enough. I had waited for him to say I was valuable. I had twisted myself into knots trying to earn a love that was conditional on my submission. But she had already told me. She had told me I was enough. She had told me I was smart. The tears came then. They weren't the hot, stinging tears of humiliation I had shed at the gala. They were deep, racking sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for the mother I had lost. I cried for the brother who was too weak to save himself. I cried for the father who had never really existed. But mostly, I cried because I was free. I wasn't worthless. I was the one who was going to tell the truth. I wiped my face. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen table. I picked up the folder of letters. I picked up the recording device. I was done waiting for permission. I was ready to burn it down. The morning of the hearing was gray and relentless. The sky over Port Alder was a flat sheet of slate, threatening rain that refused to fall. I stood in the living room of my apartment, smoothing the fabric of my charcoal suit. It was not a dress. It was armor. Marin Klein sat at my kitchen table, reviewing a stack of file folders. She looked up as I walked in. The committee has offered a secure entry, she said, her voice calm. Through the underground garage, you would avoid the press. You would avoid the crowd. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. I saw the dark circles under my eyes, but I also saw the set of my jaw. It was tighter than it used to be. No, I said. Marin took off her reading glasses. Julia, the press pool is going to be a shark tank. Your father's team has probably tipped them off to make a spectacle. If you go in the back, you control the image. If I go in the back, I said, turning to face her, I look like a victim. I look like the fragile daughter who is hiding from the consequences of her own breakdown. That is the story he wants to tell. That I am sick, that I am overwhelmed. I picked up my bag. It contained the folder of my mother's letters and the hard drive with the recording from the country club. I am walking in the front door. Marin, I want him to see me. I want everyone to see me. Marin studied me for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across her face. All right, she said, standing up and snapping her briefcase shut. The front door it is. The Northridge State House Annex was a brutalist block of concrete that sat adjacent to the manicured grounds of the Capitol. Usually, it was a quiet place where subcommittees debated zoning laws and water usage. Today, it looked like a premiere for a disaster movie. News vans lined the street. Satellite dishes rotated silently, aiming for the signal. A crowd had gathered on the steps, a mix of curious citizens, protesters holding signs about corruption, and employees from the Bailey Development Group who had likely been ordered to attend as a show of support. As Marin and I stepped out of her sedan, the noise hit us. It was a physical wall of sound, shouting, camera shutters clicking like angry insects, the hum of generators. Ms. Bailey, Ms. Bailey, is it true you are suing your father? Julia, look this way. Are the allegations about the hospital true? I kept my eyes forward. I focused on the brass railing of the staircase. Shoulders down, chin up, walk. Marin stayed close to my left, a silent shield. We moved through the parting sea of reporters. I didn't flinch. I didn't cover my face. I looked directly at the lenses, daring them to find the instability my father claimed I suffered from. Then, the crowd parted near the top of the stairs. Graham Bailey was waiting. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by Darren Holt, his attorney, and Evan. They looked like a phalanx of expensive wool and confidence. Graham stood with his hands in his pockets, looking relaxed, benevolent. He wasn't angry. He didn't look like a man facing an oversight hearing. He looked like a disappointed father waiting for a truant child. He stepped into my path. The cameras went wild. The shouting intensified, then dipped, as everyone leaned in to catch the interaction. Julia, he said. I stopped. I had to. He was blocking the door. He took a step closer. He didn't yell. He didn't posture. He dropped his voice to that soft, intimate register, the one designed to make me feel like we were the only two people in the world, and that I was failing him. You don't have to do this, he said gently. I looked him in the eye. I'm just answering a subpoena. Dad, he smiled, a sad, weary smile. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. We know why you are doing this, sweetheart, he murmured, loud enough for the nearest reporters to catch, but quiet enough to sound private. You are hurting. You feel invisible. I get that, but destroying the family work won't fill that hole in you. He reached out, as if to brush a piece of lint from my shoulder. You are doing this because you need attention, Jules, and it breaks my heart that you had to go this far to get it. It was the same cruelty as the gala, the same word, worthless, repackaged as pity. He was telling the world that this wasn't a whistleblower event. It was a tantrum. I felt a flash of the old heat, the old shame, the urge to explain, to defend, to apologize. But then I felt the weight of the bag on my shoulder. You are allowed to be proud of yourself. I didn't step back. I didn't slap his hand away. I simply looked at him with the clinical detachment of a risk analyst reviewing a bad asset. I don't need your attention. Graham, I said, my voice clear and carrying over the quieted crowd. I need you to move. I am testifying in 5 minutes. The smile froze on his face. It didn't drop, but the life went out of it. For a split second, the camera caught the real Graham Bailey, the cold, hard assessment of a predator who realizes the prey has grown teeth. He stepped aside. I walked past him. I didn't look at Evan. I walked through the heavy glass doors and into the cool silence of the annex. The hearing room was packed. Every seat in the gallery was taken. The air smelled of floor wax and nervous sweat. I took my seat at the witness table on the left. Marin sat beside me. Across the aisle, at the other table, sat Graham, Evan, and Darren Holt. Senator Wexford sat at the center of the raised dais. Flanked by 4 other committee members, she looked formidable. She banged the gavel, a sharp crack that silenced the murmurs. This session of the North Ridge Public Integrity Task Group is now in session. She announced, we are here to review the financial interplay between state-funded grants, the Alderbridge Foundation, and regional development contracts. She didn't waste time with opening statements. She went straight to the jugular. Mr. Evan Bailey, please take the stand. Evan stood up. He looked pale. His suit seemed a size too big for him today. He walked to the witness chair and took the oath. Evan tried. I watched him, and I felt a pang of pity mixed with revulsion. He tried to thread the needle. He admitted that there were discrepancies in the paperwork. He admitted that timelines were accelerated to meet city demands. Mr. Bailey, Wexford asked, looking over her spectacles, did you authorize payments to J. Bailey Consulting? Evan shifted in his seat. I authorized payments to a slate of approved vendors. I rely on my team to vet the specifics. If there were errors in the vendor list, that is a clerical oversight. A clerical oversight, Wexford repeated dryly. $4.2 million of clerical oversights? It is a large organization, Evan said, his voice thinning. We process thousands of invoices. Sometimes, things get mislabeled. He was doing exactly what I predicted. He was diffusing the intent. He was making it boring. He was claiming incompetence to avoid admitting to fraud. I watched him and saw the tragedy of his life. He was the heir, the prince, the golden boy, and yet, he was just a buffer. He was willing to perjure himself to protect a father who would replace him in a heartbeat if the stock price dipped. Thank you. Mr. Bailey, Wexford said, dismissing him with a wave of her hand. She hadn't laid a glove on him yet. She was waiting. Ms. Julia Bailey, please take the stand. The room went rigid. The whispers stopped. This was the moment. The daughter against the father. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but steady. I walked to the chair. I sat down. The microphone was cold in front of me. Raise your right hand. I swore to tell the truth. Ms. Bailey, Wexford began, her tone professional and distant. Please state your position at Larkwell Health Cooperative. I am a senior risk analyst. I said, my voice sounded strange in the room. Amplified, stripped of nuance. I specialize in vendor compliance and procurement auditing. And in the course of your duties, did you discover irregularities involving the Alderbridge Foundation? Yes. Can you describe them? I took a breath. I didn't look at Graham. I looked at the stenographer, a woman with gray hair who was typing rhythmically. I noticed a pattern of recurring payments to 4 entities that lacked standard vendor verification data. I explained. The invoices were submitted in batches just under the $15,000 threshold for mandatory secondary review. The billing codes were vague. Advisory services. Strategic consulting. And one of these entities was J. Bailey Consulting? Wexford asked. Yes. Is that your company? No, but it bears your name, Wexford noted. And the registered agent is listed as Julia Bailey. That is correct. I said, however, I did not register that company. I did not open the bank account associated with it, and I have never provided consulting services to the Alderbridge Foundation. A murmur went through the room. Graham's attorney, Darren Holt, stood up. Objection. The witness is speculating. The document lists her as the agent. Overruled. Wexford said, Ms. Bailey, if you didn't create the company, how do you explain your signature on the incorporation papers? I looked at the screen where Tessa Marr had projected the document. My signature was used without my consent. I said clearly. It was lifted from other family documents, trust agreements, tax forms, that I was asked to sign under the presumption of estate planning. So you are alleging identity theft? Wexford asked. I am alleging that my identity was weaponized to bypass the very compliance checks I was hired to enforce. I said, I was the perfect front. I had the name, I had the access, and I was trusted to never look closely at the details. I looked at Graham then. He wasn't looking at me. He was scribbling furiously on a notepad. I paused. For years. I was told that my attention to detail was a nuisance. I said, I was told that I focused too much on the small things, but the small things are where the truth hides. The silence in my family wasn't peace. It was a cover-up, and I did not consent to live inside it. The room was silent. Wexford nodded. Thank you. Ms. Bailey. Then, Darren Holt stood up for cross-examination. He buttoned his jacket. He walked toward me with the stride of a man who enjoyed hunting. Ms. Bailey, he said, his voice smooth and patronizing. You seem very certain today. But isn't it true that you have a history of, let us call it, emotional volatility? I looked at him. No, really? Holt continued. You caused a scene at the Doveridge Civic Gala just last month. You shouted at your father in front of 300 guests because he didn't praise you enough. I corrected a factual error regarding a community grant. I said, I did not shout. Holt smiled. A factual error. You felt the need to embarrass your family over a timeline discrepancy? It sounds like you hold a grudge. Ms. Bailey, I do not hold a grudge, I said. I hold a certification in risk management. Holt chuckled. Cute. But let us talk about your finances. You claim this company isn't yours, but didn't you live at the address listed on the registration? Yes, briefly. And didn't you accept a $10,000 monthly stipend from your father just last week? A sabbatical fund? No, I said. I was offered a stipend in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement. I refused to sign it. I refused the money. Holt froze. He hadn't expected me to mention the NDA. He recovered quickly. You refused the money? Or did you ask for more? I refused the money, I repeated. Holt leaned on the podium. Ms. Bailey, isn't it true that you are jealous of your brother? That you feel he was given opportunities you deserved? Isn't this entire testimony just a way to punish your father for not making you a vice president? It was the instability angle. He was painting me as the bitter, overlooked daughter. I leaned into the microphone. Mr. Holt, I said, I do not want to be a vice president of the Bailey Development Group, because based on the balance sheets I reviewed, the Bailey Development Group is technically insolvent. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath. Graham's head snapped up. Evan turned white. Holt stuttered. Objection. Relevance, I continued. My voice steady, relentless. The foundation funds are not being used for consulting. They are being used to service high-interest debt on the waterfront projects. The company is using charitable donations to pay commercial loans. That is not jealousy. That is a Ponzi scheme. Holt was shouting now. Move to strike. This is speculation. It is not speculation. Maren Klein's voice rang out from the table. Maren stood up. She held up a document. We have entered into evidence a rejected transfer request from 2018, Maren announced. Wexford looked at Maren. Explain. Maren walked to the projector. She placed a yellowed piece of paper on the glass. This is a memo from the Bailey Family Trust. Dated August 2018, Maren said. It is a request to authorize the creation of Bailey J. Consulting. She pointed to the bottom of the page. There is a handwritten note in the margin. It is initialed by Julia Bailey. The handwriting was blown up on the screen. It was my jagged, angry scrawl from years ago, a memory I had almost suppressed. Note: I do not recognize this entity. Please clarify purpose before processing. Maren turned to the room. Julia Bailey didn't just sign blindly. Maren said, she flagged this entity 7 years ago. She asked for clarification. And look at the next line. She pointed to a stamp over my note. Overridden. Per G. Bailey Executive Authority. The room stared at the screen. It was the smoking gun. It proved I hadn't been a co-conspirator. I had been an obstacle. I had tried to ask questions, and my father had used his executive power to crush my objection and forge ahead anyway. He didn't just steal my name, I said into the silence. He stole my consent. Darren Holt stood there, his mouth slightly open. He looked at Graham. Graham wasn't writing anymore. He was staring at the screen, his face drained of color. The unstable daughter narrative had just evaporated. I wasn't unstable. I was the only one who had tried to follow the rules. Wexford let the silence hang for a long, heavy minute. She wanted the image of that overridden stamp to burn into everyone's retinas. Then she banged the gavel. In light of this new evidence, Wexford said, her voice echoing in the hall, this committee is suspending public testimony. She looked directly at Graham. We are referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for a formal criminal investigation into fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. We are also filing an emergency motion to place the Alderbridge Foundation into independent receivership effective immediately. Graham stood up. This is a witch hunt, he shouted. The mask finally slipped. The benevolent patriarch was gone. He looked old, desperate, and furious. You cannot do this. I built this city. Sit down, Mr. Bailey, Wexford ordered. The room erupted. Reporters jumped over the railing. Flashes exploded like lightning. People were shouting, pointing, typing. I didn't move. I sat in the witness chair, watching the chaos. I saw Evan put his head in his hands. I saw Darren Holt frantically packing his briefcase. I saw my father shouting at a camera, his face red and distorted. It was over. The silence was broken. Marin Klein touched my arm. "Julia," she said softly, "we should go." I stood up. My legs were shaking now, the adrenaline finally crashing. We walked out, not through the back, through the center aisle. The reporters shouted my name, but the tone was different now. They weren't asking if I was crazy. They were asking if I was safe. "Ms. Bailey, how long have you known?" "Julia, are you going to press charges?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The testimony spoke for itself. We walked out into the cool gray afternoon. The rain had finally started to fall. A light, cleansing mist. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of wet pavement and ozone. Graham Bailey would fight. He would drag this out for years. There would be trials, appeals, headlines. Evan would likely turn state's evidence to save himself. The company would be dismantled, sold off for parts. My trust fund was gone. My inheritance was gone. My family was gone. I stood on the steps of the annex, watching the rain dampen the corruption signs held by the protesters. I reached into my bag and touched the folder of letters. "Telling the truth is lonely," my mother had written, "but the silence eats you from the inside." I wasn't hungry anymore. I felt Marin stand beside me. "You did it," she said. I looked at the city skyline. The Bailey Development Tower loomed in the distance, tall and imposing, but for the first time, it didn't look like a monument. It looked like just another building, made of glass and steel and borrowed money. I didn't do it for them, I said. I buttoned my coat. I did it for the girl who stayed late to fix the spreadsheets. I walked down the steps, into the rain, and for the first time in 33 years, I didn't look back to see if my father was watching. I didn't care. I was the narrator now. Thank you so much for listening to My Dad Called Me Worthless at Dinner. The senator asked to meet me. This was a story about the quiet violence of financial abuse and the courage it takes to break a silence that has been enforced for generations. I would love to know what you thought of Julia's decision. Do you think she should have taken the deal to save the family? Or was she right to burn it all down? Let me know in the comments below. And please tell me where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Revenge Stories channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. We have more stories coming soon about justice, betrayal, and the moment the underdog finally bites back. Until next time.